This presentation is designed to introduce you to the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College approach to writing a plan for a lesson and preparing for instruction. By the end of this presentation, you will be able to plan for a lesson, the objective, sub-objectives, and assessment that will lead to student mastery of learning. You will learn to build a lesson vision, purposefully lesson plan, create an engaging opening, and develop a strong closing. Why should teachers lesson plan? Especially for the novice teacher, the lesson plan is a roadmap for teaching the learning objective effectively. The lesson plan allows the teacher to align and sequence instruction in order to ensure that all students in the class master the learning objective of the lesson. The lesson plan is also a roadmap for a guest teacher, substituting for the regular classroom teacher and ensuring that instruction continues on without interruption is a challenge without a lesson plan in place. In addition, lesson planning is your documentation of your instructional practice. It's the hard evidence of how your day, your week, your month is planned for administrators, for families, and for evaluators. In fact, every teacher evaluation process will include the submission of a lesson plan as part of your evaluation. Teacher evaluation is an integral part of the early childhood profession today. The Teacher Advancement Program, or TAP, is used by Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College for evaluation of teacher candidates and in concert with school districts to assess in-service teachers. The name of this component of the evaluation process may be different with each teacher evaluation tool, but they all refer to lesson planning. Finally, it is an invaluable mental rehearsal before teaching. Planning allows the teacher to envision every step of the lesson, every set of materials that will be needed, and every word, every question, every answer that might come up in the lesson. In Lesson 2, when you read about developmentally appropriate practice, you read the NAEYC position on early childhood professional practice. It is the teacher's classroom plans and organization, sensitivity and responsiveness to all children, and moment-to-moment interactions with them that have the greatest impact on children's development and learning. Again, the greatest impact comes from your level of preparation as you plan for instruction. The components of exemplary lesson plans include measurable and explicit goals, activities, materials, and assessments that are aligned to standards, either Common Core or early learning standards, are sequenced from basic to complex, that is, that begin with concrete learning connecting to more abstract ideas, build on prior student knowledge. Lessons should access what students know and already understand about the topic and use this existing knowledge as a launching point for learning the new concept. Are relevant to students' lives. Children are more motivated and engaged in a lesson when the lesson makes sense to them and they understand why they're learning the concept. Are integrated with other disciplines. Provide appropriate time for student work, student reflection, and lesson closure. Write in the estimated time that each piece of your lesson plan will take to complete. This helps the novice teacher to pace a lesson to allow students to complete all that's expected without rushing. And that there's evidence the plan is appropriate for the age, the knowledge, and the interests of all learners. The steps to lesson planning that will be outlined in this presentation are the same steps that are taught to all teacher candidates in the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. The lesson plan format required in this presentation is also the common template used by all Mary Lou Fulton Teacher College students in their clinical experiences, including student teaching. Mary Lou Fulton Teacher College uses a backward planning process that begins with the end or the expected outcomes in mind. Please refer to Handout 1 in Lesson 6, which is the lesson planning template. First, we're going to focus on the top half of the document. With the electronic template open in another screen or a hard copy in front of you, find the vision components: teachers, subject, standard, objective, subobjective, and evidence of mastery. This is the end or the vision portion of your entire lesson plan. The first entry on the plan document is for the teacher or the teachers who created the plan and the subject of the plan. If you're co-teaching, there may be 2 or more teachers named on the plan. The subject line can mean the topic, the content area, the class period, or the particular routine that's outlined in the plan. The next step on the plan format is to write in the standard and learning objective of the lesson. The standard that you will teach may come from a district pacing guide or right from the standards themselves. To complete this part of the lesson plan, ask yourself, how well do I understand the content in the standard? You may need to do some research or a little reading to make certain that you fully understand a topic before you can teach the objective. Next, you'll need to unpack the standard carefully. What do I mean by unpack? Well, standards often have multiple sentences with multiple clauses and several objectives embedded within one standard. The unpacking process will allow you to separate out each part of the standard, examine it thoughtfully, and determine what the single objective of your lesson will be. Along with unpacking the standard to find all the parts in it, look for exemplar assessments. For example, if you have access to a teacher's manual with lesson assessments in it or exemplar district assessments, these will help you to more precisely determine what your learning objective is. Also, look at grade level curriculum guides or textbooks used in the school district. And finally, there is a treasure trove of resources available. Examine additional resources online, materials in your ASU textbooks, and in the school libraries. How do you go about unpacking a standard? Well, create a web or a visual representation to carefully unpack the standard and find your objective. You may also prefer to just highlight the key words in the copy of the standards that you're working from, whichever makes the most sense to you. It could be a web, an organizer, or highlighting, but deconstructing the standard will help you to understand what the learning objectives are embedded within the standard. Write out the standard, word for word, as it is published. Include the name of the standards that you are using and the number of the standard as well. In my example here, I'm using the Arizona Early Learning Standard in Math, Strand 2, Concept 2. Highlight or list the process verbs used in the standard. In our example here, uses is the process verb. This tells us what the student will do or what action is embedded in the standard. Highlight or list the key skill word in the standard. Data is our key word in this standard. Now that you know what is in the standard, you're able to write the specific learning objective that you will take from the standard. State the audience, or who will master the objective. State the expected observable behavior. This should be what you can see, measure, and record for evidence of mastery by the student. State the time or condition of the performance assessment. In other words, when will this evidence be observed by you? And state the degree. How will this be observed or measured by you? Here's an objective example that's taken from our Unpacking Organizer Math standard. The child, audience, will use ice cream flavor preferences gathered from classmates, condition, to state behavior, which flavor is the favorite, degree, of the class. This is an objective that teaches the standard that children will use data to see relationships and make connections with the environment. We cannot observe that a student has accomplished a covert action. In other words, we cannot look inside of their head at thinking processes. We must see them accomplish something instead. We must determine a measurable and observable way to prove that new learning has occurred. For example, you can't just ask a student to analyze. You must ask them to analyze and then write a summary. You can't ask them to just understand, but ask them to understand by completing a thinking map. You can't ask them to think about, but they must think about and then solve the problem. Or you can't ask them to just think critically. You need to ask them to think critically, then describe the details verbally. Why are sub-objectives essential to the planning process? Lesson objectives may be complex and involve multiple pieces of knowledge and skills. There are intermediate steps along the way to arriving at mastery of the objective. Students learn in bite-sized chunks that they can digest. If we as teachers unpack the objective before teaching, we can scaffold learning to support objective mastery. We can break down the learning into smaller chunks. This work will prevent you from missing important steps to the learning or making the serious mistake of randomly finding and latching on to cute activities and neglecting to teach a targeted standard. What is a sub-objective? A sub-objective is like an intermediate location leading to the destination on a map, like rest stops along the highway. In other words, sub-objectives are the planned steps in a lesson. These are the natural divisions in the lesson that support learning the objective. Sub-objectives support a review of past learning, break down the new content, teach the learning process steps, and help students to understand the reason for the lesson. In order to think through and write all the sub-objectives in your objective, return to the web or the visual representation that you use to unpack the standard. Answer these questions in the sub-objective section of the lesson plan format. What did we do yesterday that I will need to review today with the students? What is the new learning for today? What is the process for learning and applying this skill today? And why is this skill important to learn? How do you unpack a standard for sub-objectives? Well, return to the web or visual representation you began for this lesson objective. Highlight or list the concept words in the standard. In our example, to see relationships, to make sense of the environment. Tell us what the student will think or know mentally as a result of the learning in the standard. In other words, the concept words show us what the new learning is for the student. Highlight or list the skills that the concept mastery will require. Again, looking back at our original example, the skills the student will need to exercise to show mastery of this objective are gathering data from classmates about ice cream preferences, displaying this data in a real or symbolic graph, and explaining what the favorite ice cream flavor for the entire class is based on the results. These are all observable actions that the student will complete as process steps. We have emphasized that your lesson plans include measurable and explicit objective and sub-objectives aligned to the Arizona Early Learning Standards or Common Core Standards. How will you measure and show evidence that the objective was learned by the children in your classroom? While this is not an assessment course, it is important to recognize that your students must show in some way that they have mastered the learning in the lesson. You must also plan a method to record hard data and produce evidence that the students showed you their mastery. Finally, you must create an exemplar of a completed assessment for your lesson plan. For example, if you're asking students to explain the class's favorite ice cream flavor, you must develop a recording sheet to note that each student gave you their explanation, when they gave it to you, and how this was explained. There are a wide range of assessment tools. If you're not using existing tools such as a district-made or a publisher-created assessment, here are some tried and true early childhood assessments. Again, you will delve deeply into each kind of tool in your assessment course. A checklist of observed mastery. A checklist can be as simple as a roster of your student names and a description of the observed mastery. You check off each name as students perform the expected outcome. Anecdotal notes and records are your objective, qualitative observations as students are engaged in the new skill. Rubrics will use carefully chosen words and levels of performance to describe the attributes of a completed task or performance at the exemplary, proficient, or below proficient level. Portfolios showing progress over time are a compilation of work and visual displays that show development and learning over time. Performance as a demonstration of mastery is actually doing the expected skill. Though used less often in early childhood, tests including essays, multiple choice, problem solving, or short answer tests can assess student understanding. The activities and materials that you plan for your lesson must support the lesson objectives. For learning to occur, the students should be challenged whatever their level of learning. The lesson should meet the students' need for engagement and movement and thereby sustain their attention. The activities and materials should elicit a variety of thinking and provide time for thought and reflection. The most effective lessons are relevant to student lives, and they provide opportunities for student-to-student interaction. Especially in the early years, learning is a social endeavor and children need each other to think about their experiences. Effective lessons allow a young child to follow their natural curiosity and they hold some suspense and excitement. Do you recall from Lesson 2 that important developmental milestone of self-regulation? Effective lessons should allow this development to occur by providing students with choices. And with the wealth of technical resources available to incorporate in a lesson to give learning a keen edge for engagement, effective lesson plans judiciously include multimedia and technology. Plan to incorporate many resources beyond the school curriculum. And finally, the most effective plans include activities that are game-like, involve simulations, or that require creation of products and demand self-direction and self-monitoring. Please refer back to Handout 1, which is the lesson planning template. Now we're going to focus on the bottom half of the document, which is where you will write out your planning for the activities and materials in your lesson. This template uses a gradual release model, or I do, we do, you do model of direct instruction. Your planning should clearly state what you will do as the teacher for instructional input, what the students will do together with you for guided practice, and then what the students will do independently to practice the new skills. Notice the lesson plan format has parallel columns for you to think carefully about what your students will be doing to remain engaged in learning during each step of the lesson. What instructional methods to choose? The answer to that question depends on many factors. What is the content that you need to teach? What are the sub-objectives? What are the student outcomes that you need to reach? And what is the form of your lesson assessment? What does the exemplar student response look like? Other factors to consider in choosing your instructional methods include the age of the students you will be teaching, their prior knowledge regarding the content, what are the resources available to you, how much time do you have for the lesson, how did you learn this content as a student, what activities have you seen or read or heard or tried before in regards to this content, and how would the methods fit into your daily vision? The methods of early childhood include read aloud, a read aloud of quality children's literature that presents the content or the big idea in all discipline areas. In early childhood methods, games, finger plays, music, and movement are all multimodal, multisensory techniques for communicating lesson content. Interactive video projected through the smartboard can be used to engage children in content learning. It is crucial that video be used in short segments with teacher narration and student response to the visual presentation. Free exploration of materials is an inquiry-based way to introduce and discover the attributes of a lesson content. Writing or drawing in an organizer, journal, on story paper, or creating a product such as an aesthetic piece of art, a craft, or a performance are early childhood methods. Planning your lesson is the first phase of actually presenting the lesson. In your presentation, you must plan and prepare for visuals that establish the purpose of the lesson, preview the organization of the lesson, and include internal summaries of the lesson. Examples, illustrations, analogies, and labels for all of the new concepts in the lesson. Modeling by you, the teacher, to demonstrate your performance expectations. Concise communication, logical sequencing and segmenting of the sub-objectives, and all essential information and no irrelevant, confusing, or non-essential information presented. To plan the opening of your lesson, ask yourself these questions. How will you grab the student's attention and hook them into your lesson? How will you connect to their prior knowledge and experiences? How will this lesson be relevant to students' lived experience? Be sure to state explicitly what the students will be learning and why. Ending and leaving a lesson ideally is as rich and methodical as the opening and lesson input that you plan. Research affirms that the quality of closing a lesson impacts how much of the learning students recall later. Since you want your students to retain the new learning from your lesson, don't neglect or rush the closing of your lesson. The closing of your lesson should actively engage all of the students in your class in the closure of the lesson. Any of your teaching toolbox of techniques for actively engaging children in the lesson work well for engaging them in closure. For example, use a think, pair, share, or use a whip around the room. You can also use a random cold call to summarize the new learning for the entire class to reflect back on the lesson. To apply the new learning to real life and make it relevant and memorable, connect it to daily living. If students have created a product, closure allows the student to publish a product. For example, the author's chair as closure to share written products, or a presentation of finished artwork. To lesson plan and prepare effectively, begin with the end in mind. Build a lesson vision that includes the standard, a measurable, observable objective, and the evidence you will look for to assess mastery. Plan purposefully using activities and materials that will teach the sub-objectives of the learning. Create an opening that will engage all of the students, and develop a closing that will ensure retention of the new learning.